Everybody. Welcome to this panel, which is in English, on scholars at risk and the protection of academic freedom. Here you can see the participants. My name is Elina Vuola. I'm the professor of global Christianity and dialogue of religions at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Helsinki, and I'm the chair of Scholars at Risk Finland currently. The three other speakers will be Dr. Liisa Laakso, who is a senior researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute at Uppsala University. She is also chairing the Human Rights Committee of the Council of Finnish Academies. And next, we have academic research fellow, Dr. Didemünal Abadai, who works at the University of Helsinki. And her talk will not be streamed. Otherwise, the whole session will be streamed and recorded. So there will be a break in the stream. And finally, Professor Martin Kluunen, director of the Turku Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Turku, and my predecessor as the chair of SAR Finland. Unfortunately, he is late. His train from Turku was hit by a moose, or the other way around, the moose was hit by the train, but he will arrive, but he will speak last and will be here as soon as he arrives. So welcome all, both at the in the hall and online. And in the end, there will be time for discussion, and also those of you who are online will be able to participate. What is Scholars at Risk? It's an international network organization established in 1999, and it's based in New York, the United States. Today, it consists of a network of over 500 universities and institutions of higher education. There are international sections, there is a European section, and there is also regional and national sections of Scholars at Risk. Basically, Scholars at Risk undertakes advocacy and awareness-raising work concerning the situation of academic freedom in different places and regions in the world, and also concrete, direct protection for scholars who are threatened as scholars. So an important but not the only work that SAR is doing is helping potential hosts identify suitable scholars who have been identified by the Scholars at Risk International as in need of protection. So it's a kind of matchmaking that the national and regional sections then seek to host those scholars in our universities. There is no direct funding, but there are funding systems related to the Scholars at Risk. So basically what it does is that it identifies and reviews academically scholars who have applied for the status of a scholar at risk. So this is very shortly what Scholars at Risk is doing. And what I have noticed now, being the chair this year and last year, is that the line between other issues of academic freedom and the kind of very concrete threat to one individual scholar somewhere, the line is very thin. So much of the work that the different sections of Scholars at Risk are doing also tackle broader issues than the protection of scholars. I especially encourage you to see at the SAR website a very recent report that they published in November on called Free to Think. So it's a report documenting 391 attacks on higher education communities all over the world. It covers the 12-month period from August 2022 until 2022, starting from August 2021, meaning that both the war in Ukraine and the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban will be covered in that. But it's important to note that it's a global report. And it also discusses in detailed ways what these attacks mean. They can be very varied. What can be identified as attacks on academic freedom and scholars. Now, Scholars at Risk Finland, SARF, is a Finnish network which was established in 2017. We are operating administratively under UNIFI Board of Directors, which means the Finnish Rectors Council of Finnish universities. And starting this year, we are happy to say that now all Finnish universities are members of SAR Finland. So we hold regular meetings. The chair rotates between universities. It used to be in Turku, it's now in Helsinki, and starting 2024 it will be in Tampere. We have done some hosting of Scholars at Risk in our universities, and there is more information on that on our website, but also on the website of individual universities. We also hold regular meetings with the Scholars at Risk International, the European network. And what we have found out is that the kind of closest and more convenient and operationally easiest partner for us is the SAR Nordic. Probably very much because our universities and societies are so similar. There is a local guide how to host a Scholar at Risk for different universities available. It was done during when the chair was in Turku. We are organizing national Scholars at Risk days. The first one was in Turku in November 21, and the next one will be here in Helsinki in the end of this year. We don't have the exact date yet. Now, I think my colleagues here will give you good examples of what academic freedom means and what kind of difficulties we are at concerning academic freedom today. But very shortly, I could say that there are threats. The most obvious threat is, of course, what authoritarian regimes of very different kinds do in very different countries and for a variety of reasons. Targeting academic freedom. But it's also important to note that the kind of populism in our democratic countries also, which questions the validity of research, do your own research, or the bad use, criticizes the bad use of public funds for research and universities, ideological issues that are relevant for both natural sciences, just to mention an example, issues about climate change, and humanities and social sciences. So this kind of discussion is I think, global, but it's also relevant in our countries and in Finland. And yes, it poses also a threat to academic freedom, if not a direct physical violent attack on individual scholars. Funding issues are relevant. How is research funded in different countries? So it's about broader issues than direct threats to individual scholars, but these two things are related. Threats to individual scholars can, of course, be related to war and conflict. We see it very clearly in Ukraine. But also in countries that are not under violent war, we can see academic infrastructure being severely weakened for a variety of reasons. Threats that are research related usually, as I said, have to do with certain kinds of fields of research, of which my colleagues will probably be talking, often related to, of course, politics, history, human rights issues, sexuality, religion. As a religion scholar, I know that this is one of the issues that why scholars might get into trouble. Politicization of research themes, like I already mentioned, that we can also see in Finland. Sometimes the threat is very gendered. We can see two very contemporary examples. Most of the scholars who have left Ukraine are women, because men cannot leave. They have to stay in the country. So it is heavily gendered, and it has different consequences for men and women in the case of Ukraine. Those scholars who have to leave as refugees are mostly women, and they mostly come with young children. So it's not just the individual excellent scholar who flees. And then the total opposite is Afghanistan, where women, as you have probably read, cannot even attend university anymore. So there it is the other way around. What happens to female scholars in Afghanistan? And of course, the consequences for scholars are everything from imprisonment and exile and killing to their work made practically impossible. And they need a place where they can continue their work. Also, something that is close to my heart is that we have to remember that it's not just the individual researchers that are at risk, but there are also something we could call fields at risk, which we can see in places like Turkey that Didem Abadai will be speaking about, also in Hungary, so in Europe, where we can see a withdrawal of funding and positions from certain fields, considered, explained as political, ideological, non-scientific, but there are clear political reasons behind for withdrawing of funds and closing down entire fields. So the question is about political steering and use of research in different countries. And as I said, this is often but not always linked to threats to individual scholars. There are certain very dangerous fields of research in different countries. And more broadly, I think we could also discuss that there is, in our public discussion, and we can talk how severe or serious this is in Finland, for example, is the misunderstanding or deliberate misinterpretation of what research and academic freedom are and mean. We see people in very high positions in Finland who, in my view, and I think anybody who works at the university, I'm just wondering that doesn't he or she know what we are doing and why and for what purpose in the university. And now I will soon stop. Oops, why doesn't my slide come? Oh, okay, well, maybe it was the end. Now about scholars at risk and protection of academic freedom. I think what the strengths are, I had a slide, but I don't know what happened. The very good side of SAR International is that it's an established, international, recognized network, meaning also that they do the academic review of applicants. So not anybody can write there and say that I'm a scholar at risk. They do the academic review before they announce the person looking for a hosting university somewhere else. So there are established standards that we all share as universities globally. So after the person has the status, anybody can be sure that he or she is really an established scholar and can be replaced if necessary. Another strength is that, like the report that is on their website, that they do awareness raising globally about the situation of academic freedom. And I think it's a good example of global solidarity between universities. It's sort of from peer to peer kind of work globally. And it can help individual scholar and even save lives. There are critical views of scholars at risk that I think some of my colleagues will talk about. I think some of the limitations are funding limitations, that the university that wants to host a scholar at risk needs to find the funding. So it comes from universities or public funds in some cases, or private funds such as private foundations. But it doesn't include funding for somebody who applies the status. The question is also about how short or long the hosting should be. Sometimes 1 year is, most often 1 year is not enough. You flee your country, sometimes with your family, and then another university on the other side of the world says, yeah, fine, come here for a year. But it's not human. So there should be much more longer-term solutions that for the most immediate situation, after the most immediate situation, and that concerns us all, also the Finnish universities. Now we can also ask, is the focus on individuals too narrow, even if necessary? And it can be also potentially labeling for an individual scholar. I'm a scholar at risk, even if he or she is fleeing for his or her life. Another limitation, what I have seen during last year being the chair of Scholars at Risk Finland, is that there happens rapid changes in the world that we cannot, maybe we could have expected, but we didn't, and they happened very fast. And I think Afghanistan and the war in Ukraine are good examples. SAR International is rather slow as a process and as a network to react to rapid changes in the world. So there are also other actions in different countries that are maybe more rapid than the scholars at risk, both international and national. But that slowness comes also from the review process. That it's not the same as, of course, a scholar can apply as a refugee anywhere, and that might be faster. But if you are seeking protection as a scholar and you are seeking relocation in another university because you cannot work in your university, the review process takes more time. So this is shortly kind of my presentation for this panel, and we continue with. Will you settle the next slides? We continue with Liisa Laakso, who will talk about knowledge, politics, and academic freedom. Thank you. You have 20 minutes, Liisa.
Thank you very much, Elina. It's a great pleasure for me to give a presentation here. And my focus will be on politics and academic freedom. And as was stated in the description of our panel, academic freedom as one tenet of democratic societies is not necessarily considered important. And what does this mean? I think that the concern we have today is that is democracy considered important? Is democracy going to be corrupted? And this picture now is from Brazil 2 or 3 days ago. And what does it manifest? It does not manifest a crisis of the idea of democracy. These people are not rioting because they oppose democracy. They are rioting for people's power. They are rioting because the trust and respect to the institutions of democracy has been lost, not the idea of democracy. And this then brings me to one of the early thinkers of liberal democracy, Montesquieu and the thinking of the origins of liberal democracy. Montesquieu is famous not only of the doctrine of separation of powers, the executive, the judiciary, and legislature, but also of the typology of governments, which he divided to despotism, monarchy, and republic, subdivided into democracy and aristocracy. And these types of governments, according to Montesquieu, have their own distinctive principle. The principle of democracy is political virtue, by which he meant the love of the laws of the country, including democratic constitution. In contrast to the vulgar understanding of enlightenment and modernization as a linear, predetermined progress, Montesquieu was arguing that the principles of all types of governments can be corrupt and will corrupt. In a democracy, the corruption of the government sets in when people attempt to govern directly and try to debate for the Senate, for the executive, for the magistrate, to decide for the judges. Democracy then is corrupted not only when equality is extinct, but when equality becomes extreme, when the views and decisions of all citizens are regarded as valuable and would be at the same level. I have been thinking about this Montesquieu's thinking about extreme equality. What does it mean when we are looking at the internet and social media, which are rapidly spreading fake news, conspiracy theories, and lies? It's not rare that politicians among them, who are spreading lies, are referring to freedom of expression and are saying that the question is about their own opinions, even when the claims are proved to be false. Now, for instance, President Trump's speeches have been analyzed in detail. And during the 4 years, according to the fact-finding checkings, the lies he presented total more than 30,000, which means on average 21 lies per day. And the frequency of the lies was also related to, of course, to the political events and to the discussions in the society. And for instance, there was a rapid expansion of Trump's lies when the COVID disease was spreading. And COVID was not the only issue where the claims and opinions of Trump and his supporters contradicted the views and opinions of scientists. This then relates to the academic freedom and its importance. Academic freedom is a specific and a necessary norm in democracies. Democratic competence in decision-making requires that expert opinions are valued over all other opinions. The question then is not about freedom of speech, covering scholars' rights to express their opinions, but it is about protecting of the production of scientific knowledge and appreciation of that knowledge. And that is why academic freedom is often stipulated at the level of constitutions. So it's not only freedom of expression, which concerns the media, for instance. In the Finnish constitution, for instance, academic freedom is stipulated in the paragraph of the autonomy of universities. And 3 years ago, an index of academic freedom was introduced by the University of Göteborg Varieties of Democracy database, together with the Scholars at Risk network. And it is so far the most comprehensive index for academic freedom. It is an aggregated measure, expert-coded data, answering the question, to what extent is academic freedom respected? And the reference for this index is UNESCO's definition in the recommendation concerning the status of higher education teaching personnel, a status which is approved by the global community. The index then measures the absence of fraud, systematic. It is measuring that there is no interference and restrictions by non-academic actors to the affairs in the universities and institutions of research and higher education. It's covering also the safety in the campus, which is important for the students in particular, and it's also includes the freedom of expression in terms of the abilities of the scholars to participate in political discussions. And what are then the trends? I mean, we, as Elina was saying, the situation is alarming in many countries. I mean, in this figure, you see the trends both in the world and in different continents. And on the top of the figure is European. No, on the top of the figure actually is Australia and Oceania, where the developments have been relatively stable. And Europe is the green line, going a little bit down, but quite alarming developments you can see in South America, also North America, and then Asia. Africa, in contrast to many other regions, is still, I would say, in a good track, but of course the levels have been much lower than for the world in average. But these are the global trends. And then I go to one study I have conducted with the Tunisian economist Haider Kratou. We were looking at the relationship between academic freedom and electoral democracy. I'm not going into detail of this study, but we were looking at this relation in Africa, where the transition to multi-party democracies happened quite at the same time in early 1990s, and therefore it was possible to look at the quality of the electoral system within a clearly defined period. And what we found clearly was that the preceding academic freedom was supporting the quality of electoral democracy. And how do we explain and understand this relates to the independence of academics to make the government and decision makers accountable, to safeguard the quality of the freedom of expression, to safeguard the quality of the legislation covering the elections, etc. So the role of political scientists, lawyers, for instance, was very important. And of course, academic freedom also affected the quality of the civil servants who were entering the governance system later on and who were responsible for this, for the conduct of elections in particular. And I just want to show from our study 2 cases. Ghana is a case where the level of academic freedom was relatively high even during the military rule. And this then probably has supported the political developments in the country. So it's relatively stable and elections are well conducted. Whereas Kenya started from a very different level, but now in Kenya the blue line is the level of academic freedom measured in accordance to the Varieties of Democracy Index. Now the level of academic freedom is relatively high, and we predict that electoral democracy is also improving. And actually the recent elections in Kenya showed that the public and political parties in the end accepted the election results. So there were no widespread violence, even though opposition parties were, of course, very discontent of the results. I just want to show 2 examples also with regard to the same variables, Ukraine and Russia. And you see that both the levels of academic freedom and the quality of the elections have been very volatile in Ukraine, and Russia, as you see, is having very negative and worrying trends. And this then also relates to the issue of peace. And this is just a recent correlation we were looking at with conflicts and academic freedom. And it also shows that the lower levels of academic freedom, the higher is the likelihood that there are internal internal conflicts, internal violence, or conflicts with the neighboring countries. This then brings me to some important points with regard to academic freedom. Now, often you hear the kind of argument that academic freedom is necessary for good quality science and research. But that actually is not necessarily true. Also, authoritarian states and authoritarian regimes have been able to support research and science that has been quite prominent. For instance, we know that in Nazi Germany, some of the major scientific innovations were produced during the Nazi regime related to cancer research, for instance. And now, today, we see that some authoritarian countries like China, for instance, is really progressing in science and engineering, not in social sciences, and not necessarily even in humanities, but they are doing very well. In Africa, for instance, I could mention Rwanda as a country that is investing quite remarkably in higher education and research, but within a very authoritarian context. And then I want to show this kind of general trends. The blue with the academic publications. The blue trend represents high-income economies, Europe, North America, etc. And and the red line, upper middle income economies like China, for instance, and the yellow one, low middle income economies. And these blue and yellow line countries often are not democracies, and I think that it's the most important task for us to support academic freedom in those countries, not because of the quality of science and research, but because of peace and democracy. That's what I want to emphasize, that academic freedom is a necessary ingredient of competent democratic decision making. And that's also why I think that the government of Finland and the European Union, for instance, should fund initiatives like Scholars at Risk. It is the most important area in foreign policy and for the kind of use of soft power in foreign policy, also for our own future. And last but not least, maybe some words of university autonomy, which is also something where the global solidarity and global support is needed. Academic freedom does not mean freedom to do whatever you want. I mean, and that's why university autonomy also needs to be understood literally. It is about autonomous, it is about giving rules to yourself. And that then refers to the peer review processes, to the decision making of the scholars themselves. What is a good quality research? How do you select professors, the staff? What kind of papers are accepted to be published? How do you decide about funding for research? Academic autonomy on academic freedom means respecting those rules. And that is why also for the universities, for instance, the statutes of the universities are so important, so that the academic community itself can govern and take the responsibility of the decisions made, and then to prove to the society that knowledge produced is independent, and it is checked, and it is something that can be trusted as a basis for the decision making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liisa. I forgot to mention that in my speech that the Human Rights Committee of the Council of Finnish Academies that Liisa chairs awarded Scholars at Risk Finland last year with their first ever Risto Pelkonen Human Rights Award, which of course was very important for us working for Scholars at Risk. As I said previously, the next speech will not be streamed or recorded, but please stay online. We will have another talk after this one. And now I will give the floor to researcher Didem Ünal Abadai, who will be speaking about academic freedom and gender studies in Turkey. The floor is yours, Didem. Welcome back, those of you who are online. Thank you very much, Tidem, and I'm happy to see our last but not least speaker survived by the moose, hit with the moose. Welcome, Professor Martin Kluunen from the University of Turku, and he will be speaking about Scholars at Risk Finland, some observations. And after Martin's talk, there will be space for discussion and questions. Thank you. Come here. So, glad to see you. You have to talk to this. I already introduced you in the beginning, like who you are. Very interesting. I didn't know about these women's universities.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks to the organisers for inviting me to this, and sorry if I repeat anything that people have already said. I didn't get to see much of the previous speeches because of a moose that stopped my train this morning. So yeah, I'm Martin Kluunen, I'm Director of the Turku Institutes for Advanced Studies, TIAS, at the University of Turku, and I'll make some remarks today about my experience of working in Scholars at Risk. And I actually think it works quite well with me coming at the end, hearing the kind of overviews that have been given, and then more specifically about what's been happening in Finland. I probably should start at the beginning and say how I first got involved. But to be quite honest, I can't remember. Irinia, my colleague, Irinia Parkkonen from the University of Turku probably knows better than me. But as I recall, sometime in about 2018, I was invited, I became aware that the university was applying for funds from the Academy of Finland's Profi 5 scheme, which helps universities to reshape what they're doing, and I became aware that the university was applying for funding, and I'm always keen on applying for funding. And as we discussed that scheme, it became clear that work around researchers at risk was becoming a priority for the University of Turku, and especially for the TS Board of Management. So I started to make inquiries around Scholars at Risk activities and found out that the Finnish section of Scholars at Risk had only been started a year before, in May 2017. I then found out that the University of Turku, in the form of Erkki Suttonen, was co-chair in the Finnish section along with Elina Pirjantainiemi from Åbo Academy. So I spoke to Erkki and was soon invited to go along to meetings and effectively do Scholars at Risk work. So the story of me starting in Scholars at Risk is kind of being dragged in and then becoming more and more involved. So some reflections upon that. Why would people who were working on Scholars at Risk want someone like me to become involved? And I think there are four things here: language, profession, experience, and position. Language. I'm a native English speaker, and for better or worse, that helps in an organisation which is based in the United States and largely operates in English. And of course, I got the chance to go along to another set of meetings where everybody was Finnish but speaking English for me. So I always like to be at those events. Secondly, I'm an academic. I'm an actual scholar. That might not seem like much on the face of it, but in actual fact, when you look at it, most of the people undertaking Scholars at Risk work in Finland are not scholars. They tend to be administrative staff, great people, but generally people working in their university's international section and not necessarily scholars. Third, I also had some experience of this type of work. For around 20 years, I'd been chair of the executive committee of an NGO called FreeMuse, which campaigns for musicians' rights to freedom of expression. So I can chair meetings, I can think about fundraising, and as an academic, I'm interested in issues around freedom of expression. And finally, my position of director of TIAS, I think, helped in at least three ways. First, TIAS is interdisciplinary, and I have experience of more range of disciplines than most people, so I guess I might be able to be empathetic with more academics than most academics are. Secondly, and more importantly, institutes for advanced studies do have a tradition of working with researchers at risk. The First Institute was founded in Princeton in 1930 and was soon home to a number of Jewish scholars fleeing Nazi Germany, of which the most prominent was Albert Einstein. And closer to home, at the time that I started getting involved, Tampere was hosting actually 2 Turkish scholars, and their current director, Juha Teperi, is also working on scholars at risk activities. So institutes for advanced studies have been involved in scholars at risk activities for a long time. And thirdly, as was pointed out to me, the position of TIAS director is unique. We work across 5 faculties: education, economics, humanities, law, social science. And so I have access to more resources and people than most deans do. I kind of get to know more people in the university, and I'm supported by my board of management in doing that. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody who got me involved knew all this, but they knew bits about this, so I think that helped. Oops. Sorry. Okay, the next thing. What helped what happened next and what helped in all that? Well, quite a few things. First, we got some money. That always helps. In this case, TS got some funding, which was part of that application for POFI 5 funding. Of course, we didn't get what we asked for, but we did get enough to allow us to host a scholar for 3 years, and we subsequently filled that position. That was actually quite scary. I felt a great deal of responsibility inviting someone who was at risk to come to Finland. Not because of any danger, but because I wanted to make sure that we had the resources to support them properly. Luckily, we do have those resources, and I knew that there would always be someone around to help, but I did feel that responsibility. We also used the POFI 5 money to develop a guide to hosting for universities based on conversations that we had with Scholars at Risk themselves, and that guide is still available to all Scholars at Risk Finland members. Then I became chair of Scholars at Risk Finland, which I did between 20 and 21. Erkki Suutinen moved to Namibia, and I kind of replaced him as the Turku rep. I think that period, the period I was chair, coincided with the period within the Finnish sector, which was moving from being established to one where it was becoming more active. And it's now great that all the Finnish universities are now members of Scholars at Risk Finland. Now, the years 2020 to 1 were, of course, the years of COVID. And I was actually at a SAR meeting when I first found out that I wouldn't be able to go anywhere for 6 months. That meant a lot of online meetings for Scholars at Risk, like everyone else. Not my favourite thing to do, much better to meet in person. But we carried on, and I think that we were, and doubtless still are, on a learning curve. We're a young organisation which is learning a lot. But what did being active actually mean? Well, in terms of TIAS, we used the POFI 5 money we got to host someone. We then organised the first Scholars at Risk Finland Day. At national level, we were trying to raise awareness. We lobbied on particular cases. We were also linking with international parts of Scholars at Risk, the international organisation, the Nordic network, and so on. And universities were undertaking a lot of activities, ranging from hosting Scholars at Risk to raising awareness to including Scholars at Risk in their teaching activities and so on. At Turku, as I said, we used the money to host a scholar. We also organised the first Scholars at Risk Finland Day with a ridiculous URL, which is up there, which was really, I think, an awareness-raising exercise. And the second one will take place in December this year. Then we got some more money from the Kone Foundation. We made a bid to Kone to say, can you fund some Scholars at Risk? Again, we didn't get as much as we asked for. In TIAS, our normal fellowships are for 3 years. We invite people to do self-designed research projects for 3 years. When we were doing the Kone bid, we added 2 months to that 3 years and made the period 38 months. And the reason we did that, and I think this is something I'd like to discuss today, was that we had a 2-month induction period. And we thought this was a really good thing to do to people. You know, if someone is coming from a really, really difficult situation and moving to another country, they're very unlikely to hit the ground running as an academic. This is not going to happen. So we applied and got funding for a 2-month period where we said, okay, welcome to Finland. This is how you learn a bit of the language. This is how you get a bank account. This is how you do kind of practical things, get your kids into school. And I think that's a really hard thing to get funded, but I think it's essential. I think thinking about the needs of the scholar is outside of their academic needs is something we need to think about. Following getting money from the Kony Foundation, the crisis in Ukraine erupted. And possibly for the first time in, probably the only time in my academic career, a funder approached me and said, would you like some more money? That doesn't happen very often. Of course, there were conditions, and the condition was that we did some work around the Ukraine crisis, which we did. And we currently have a couple of scholars displaced by the Ukraine crisis working in Turku. And so currently in TIAS we are hosting a number of scholars, and I can talk about that and answer questions about that if you like. This is a kind of personal account, but I hope it's kind of gives some practical things to talk about. And these are very personal observations. I'm not speaking on behalf of Scholars at Risk Finland, I'm speaking on behalf of Martin Clunan. Scholars at Risk Finland is applying a sticking plaster to a great big gaping wound. The demand for our services is often far beyond what we can cope with. And I think Scholars at Risk will be successful when it no longer has to exist. The reality is that those working on Scholars at Risk Finland, as I said, tend to be people who are in the international section of their university, who are doing Scholars at Risk activities on top of everything else that they're doing. I think sometimes people think Scholars at Risk Finland is this big organisation with hundreds of people working for it. It's not. It's well determined people who are doing this on top of their normal workload. So that's just the way of saying it. Our ability to do things is well beyond what we would like to do. And in this world of almost continued crisis, there's always a new demand. Ukraine is obviously a major issue at the moment. But when there are only 1 or 2 people in the university doing SAR work, when you're doing Ukraine, you can't do Afghanistan, and you can't do Iran, and you can't do China. So there's a constant demand upon us to do more and more things. And as I say, we got this little small sticking plaster over a really big wound. I don't have a magic wand here, of course, but it's maybe something I can discuss. But I would say that the great thing about getting involved in Scholars at Risk activities is you get to meet people whose lives you can really change. I was actually at dinner on Saturday with a scholar who was saying, 6 months ago I was really, really desperate. Things are at least better now. And that's just that's an honour to be able to do that sort of work. I don't think there's anything special about that work. I just think it's part of being human and part of what it is to be an academic. As I said, we are on a big learning curve. It's worth repeating. We've only been established since 2017. That's not long. And we're constantly thinking about what we do and how to improve what we do. Thinking about that needs both experience and time, and we're a bit short of both of those at the moment. I mentioned that Institutes for Advanced Studies, they do have a history of working with Scholars at Risk, but I would also admit that they may not be the best places for them. I run an Institute for Advanced Studies, and there's a long history of such institutions going back nearly 100 years. As I said, the first one was in Princeton in 1930, and was soon home to a lot of Jewish scholars fleeing Nazi Germany. Institutes for Advanced Studies are generally interdisciplinary and also based on free research. In some ways, they're a perfect home for Scholars at Risk. If you're an Institute for Advanced Studies, you have very few teaching obligations, if any, and you're left alone to get on with your research. It's fantastic, at least for the years you can do there. However, they are also somewhat elitist. For example, in my institute, when we do a call for fellows, which we normally do annually, of the applications we get, success rates are about 1 to 2%. It's incredibly tough to get into an Institute for Advanced Studies. Our fellows are a mixture of postdoctoral fellows within 5 years of passing their PhD and what we call collegium, 12 years of the PhD. And when we recruit, to be honest, we want the best. We go out there deliberately to get the top academics. This also applies to our scholars at risk work. We have a policy of getting the best scholars that we can. That is not the same as getting the most needy. Our criterion of selecting even scholars at risk is academic excellence, not personal need. And I think about that a lot. And I'm not sure that I can solve that. But when I'm welcoming a scholar at risk into an Institute for Advanced Studies, I have to make sure that academically they are at home, that they can operate at that kind of level. Because there's no point in bringing them and they feel totally alienated. And I think, I think there are a lot of tensions in scholars at risk work, and that's just one of them, the kind of personal one. I can talk about our recruitment processes, but I don't want to take up too much time. I think there's a lot of lip service. I do think that universities want to proclaim their support for academic freedom in kind of emotional terms, but less ready to offer resources to do that. They expect scholars at risk activities to largely be externally funded, either by the foundations or by the ministry. There have been exceptions to this, and obviously I understand that universities have lots of calls upon their resources. But if universities were to commit 1% of their budgets to scholars at risk activities, it would make a hell of a lot of difference. We're not asking for the world, just a small percentage could make a big, big difference. Scholars at Risk Finland was established under UNIFI's remit, under the auspices of the Rectors Organisation, UNIFI, and it has benefited a lot from its support. We still enjoy a close relationship with them, and it's important to keep the rectors on board. And we have a kind of relationship of sort of relative autonomy. We're kind of under their wing, but we're also able to speak out with our own voice. This perhaps picks up on some of the things that Deedon was saying. We need to sell scholars at risk to Finland and Finland to scholars at risk. One of the reasons I think that having scholars at risk in institutes of advanced studies is that I can now show that this is not a case of charity. This is a case of attracting extremely talented people to Finland. Our scholars at risk are assets, not burdens. So I think that we can sell the ideas of scholars at risk to wider Finnish society, and in part that constantly means raising awareness. But I also have to be honest, recruiting scholars at risk to Finland can be difficult. At any given moment, you can go onto the International Scholars at Risk website and see scholars at risk who are looking for positions. That list contains anonymous details of their research interest and the countries in which they wish to work. Not very many of them put down Finland as the first country they wish to work in. Some of them put down the Nordic area. Most want to be in the United States or Middle and Western Europe. So in some senses, we have to sell the idea of coming to Finland to the scholars at risk themselves. And I've had some interesting conversations about that. I think that does mean, that it's been interesting that the people have told me that I need to sell my Institute for Advanced Studies and what a good place Finland is to be a scholar to international people. And I think that's part of what we need to do. This leads into the next point, that selling is a competition. As I said, most scholars at risk are funded by external sources, and that means entering the competition to get the funding. If you get that funding, that may mean that another worthy course doesn't get the funding. Of course, it depends on where you're applying to, and all things. And this raises another question about, again, perhaps picking on some of the points that were made earlier. Why should funders fund so-called privileged academics? Aren't there more urgent causes always than what's perceived to be kind of middle-class, highly educated, elitist people? How do we make the case for that? I think the answer to that is to continually make the case that academic freedom affects everyone, the whole of society. Academics are not a bunch of self-serving privileged people, but are people who work for the benefit of the whole of society. This is often crucially important in cases where the media are being silenced or simply don't care. And academics are often the only people who can speak out on certain issues. So we need to protect academic freedom, not for the sake of academics, but for the sake of everyone. Finally, an old English phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I do think, I've mentioned already, there's a lot of tensions in our activities, and one of the biggest tensions, I think, is the desire to simply do something. When the latest crisis arrives, we have to do something about this. And in some places, I've seen scholars at risk positions advertised for being available for 6 months. Now, with the best will in the world, I don't think that it's very responsible to invite someone for simply 6 months. What happens after that 6 months? What happens after 3 years, let alone 6 months? Sometimes, of course, we need to act quickly and get somebody out of a dangerous situation and just get them out. I understand that. But in my experience, that's comparatively rare. But there's always tensions. Universities want to say, we helped 20 people. They'd rather help 20 people than help 5 people for a longer period. So that, you know, my view is that I don't think it's worth having a scholar at risk for less than 2 years. It takes them a year to get used to being in the country and then another year to start working properly. Okay, some rough conclusions. I sort of fell into scholars at risk work prompted by my board of management and the opportunity to bring in funds to change our activities. Ever since then, I've been on a learning curve, and that definitely continues. My observations today are very personal and based on what I've experienced so far. But in concluding, I'm also aware that most of my observations have been at a kind of institutional level, and I've said very little about the scholars at risk themselves, the people that we should be focusing on. So this is a reminder to myself to say something about that. Here I would emphasise just one thing. When we undertook the research for producing our guide, added to my own experience of working with scholars at risk, shows me that above all else, scholars at risk simply want to be treated as scholars. They don't want charity, they just want the opportunity to work and contribute for the benefit not only of themselves, but also societies. They are generally highly motivated and talented people who just need some support in the short term. If you can put that in place, then you can let them flourish. So, for example, within my own institution, we don't do anything special for our scholars at risk on a day-to-day basis. They get the same opportunities and have the same obligations as our other fellows. Now, of course, in the background, we've got help and we say we're always available and so on, but on a day-to-day basis, they are acting just like any other scholar. They are the scholars who happen to be at risk, so the scholarship comes first. That's perhaps my major lesson, and those are my thoughts, and thank you very much for listening to them.
Martin, take it with you and you can sit next to me. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, Martin and Didem. We have a little bit more than 15 minutes for questions and answers or any kind of discussion, both online and here. You can tell if you want to ask a specific speaker, one of us, or just pose a more general question or comment. Please feel free. Yes, please.
There are two things which I'm not quite certain you got right in your lessons. The first is you are missing the problem with the scholars, what they do. There are serious problems on that one. I mean, there's a French Ministry of Education who wrote a paper which applies in most countries, saying that the scholars nowadays usually don't make papers that are fully or good quality. One example, this is what did Pocassan, Lindsay and Blackburn made about gender studies, showing that they could be accepted in high quality paper journals, very lousy papers, completely stupid ones. That's one example. The other thing, which is more serious, which the Ministry of Education in France pointed, that their education is not very good. People are telling their own ideas and so on. For example, if I remember correctly, that was in Belgium. In philosophy, they required that Heidegger is not anymore taught in lessons because he was a short period of time a Nazi, pro-Nazi people, and no problem with Sartre, which was 17 years pro-Stalinist. The second, where you see this one, is.
Okay. So, do you have a specific question, or is that?
Yes, I'll show you a little bit because this is a bit complicated.
Okay.
For the social sciences in Lille, they refuse to work with police with actual cases because this is against their rules. The second thing, which is more serious, is that the administration is not very keen on protecting scholars. For example, in the US, people are attacked by militant students, which are liberal democratic students. If they don't like the results, they attacked. And for example, one case was that the administration said, "We cannot protect you." So. And
okay. Yes, please, shortly, that there will be space for other
just
questions.
Just one.
Yeah, very shortly.
I've been attacked by militant people when I'm doing work about idiopathic environmental illnesses, and the thing is, again, they are people which are not, as you say, populistic. They are typically that is what you call liberal democratic people who are attacking you. So your attack content is completely wrong in my experience, and the problem we have with the students, with the scholars, is also quite serious.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody wants to comment? Lisa, please. Shortly.
Yes. I think that this issue of the quality of science, it is the responsibility of scholars. I mean, we have these peer review systems, and there are flaws, and of course the pressure to publish very much, and the kind of internal corruption within some publishing houses that you want to have citations with the same journals, and that's counterproductive for the quality of science. But the research ethics is really the responsibility of the scholars, and we have to discuss continuously about these problems. And also the safety in the campus, as I said, it's one of the criteria in the index of academic freedom, and as you saw, the situation has deteriorated even in the US. So this is also something we have to observe, that the teachers and the students feel safe and are able to teach and learn. So I would say that these exactly are issues which relate to the autonomy of the university and the quality of the work they are doing, where the peer review and the collegial responsibility is something we have to discuss critically also.
Martin, please.
Yeah, I share some of your concerns, but I do think there are things we can do about it, and I can only speak from my own experience, but when we are recruiting scholars at risk, there is a review process of their work, and if their work is not up to the standard, I think it needs to be in order to operate within an Institute for Advanced Studies. I say, I'm sorry, you know, we cannot accept you because you are not the sort of scholar that we are looking for. And that's a really hard thing to do, but I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Online? Okay. Do you have a question? Okay.
Hi, I'm Emilia Palonen. I was following you online, so now I arrived here right on time for the questions. I'm quite impressed about the panel. Of course, I missed your talk because I was online. But so at least some of us stuck there as well. And I also find I'm like Lisa. I'm in this Human Rights Committee of the Finnish Academy. So I have been working on this for a while, and I have also sought after funding for colleagues both from Ukraine and from Russia in this change situation. And I completely agree with this practical advice of like the length of stays that scholars would need and the inability to produce massive things in 6 months. I have some friends from Turkey who are also scholars at risk and who have been saved somewhere else. And once you have been saved, you are already in this category of a scholar at risk, and it's difficult for you then to return to your own country, even if you run out of funding opportunities, work opportunities in this context where you have been displaced. So I wonder about this in the very Finnish context of precarious careers, where you really need to have enough networks to be securing yourself the next precarious contract. I've been in this situation myself as well for 15 years after coming back to Finland. So how are you seeing these possibilities now? Like, what are you doing in order to sustain the scholars at risk at these institutions? And this can be also to Elina.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, very shortly, I think all the worries you raise we are very conscious of them, and we are, the people who work for scholars at risk, I think internationally or in Finland. And like Martin said, we are doing voluntary work. I mean, I'm not being paid. None of us is being paid for SAR work. So we do it as a part of our university work, either in administration or academic work, but it's something you feel like you want to do that. But it's extra. So that means that also the human resources for this work are narrow, I think everywhere, because it's an international issue. We are very aware of all the practical difficulties of not only entering and staying, but also of possible return. And also that it's another precarious scholar with a different kind of career path coming to a very precarious field. And that might also cause competition and envy and whatever, among your peers in your field, that, somebody gets this status and, gets what I didn't get in a fair competition. And, all those problems are there. And I think it doesn't, my personal view is that even with the problems and also what the person who is just leaving expressed, we shouldn't stop doing this. We have to try to find the best ways to be in solidarity with our peers in other countries. And as I think especially Didem's and Lisa's talk made clear, is that it's intimately tied with the larger question of protecting academic freedom. So, and we are welcoming all good ideas for our work, because we are a very small group of people. And in December this year, when we will have the second SAR National Day at the campus in Helsinki, one of the ideas we had yesterday in a meeting, where Martin was also present, was to talk about this very much in the Finnish context. Funding, university responsibilities, how to tackle the lip service that Martin said, that, we are international, we are global, we have our ethical, ethical values and so on, and it doesn't turn into practice very easily. Do you want to comment on that, Didem or somebody else?
Yes, maybe I can also say a couple of words. Thank you so much for your question, and I think it's really to the point, and it really builds up on what has been said so far during the talks. Yes, precariousness is, I think, a very big issue for scholars in exile and scholars associated with Scholars at Risk Foundation. And most of the time, what is critical is this time period of funding. And these scholars who are coming from very difficult positions, of course, they face different threats in different contexts. Sometimes the threats are not very immediate. Sometimes they are. There are immediate security threats, but in any way, they are operating under very precarious conditions, and they are saved from somewhere to somewhere, and that somewhere is neoliberal academia in the West most of the time, and they are expected to operate under very precarious conditions in the neoliberal academia, with the expectation of productivity and bringing fresh and, let's say, authentic knowledge into the hosting institution. And I think we need to really question how realistic these expectations can be when the funding offered is only for 6 months, for one year. And as it's been also said, there's always this stigmatization. And so being scholar at risk or being an academic in exile always positions the scholar in question on the margins. So they are most of the time not very organically incorporated into the hosting situations, but only reserved on the border or on the margins as, as guest or visiting researchers, as visiting researchers who are going to soon leave. So unless these mechanisms to establish an organic synergy between the scholar in exile and the hosting institutions are built, I think it wouldn't be really realistic to expect these scholars to, to really bring this authentic knowledge into the hosting institutions. This is, at least I can say from experience, from what I see among my Turkish colleagues in Germany, in other places in Europe. So yes, the stigmatization and lip service, and also this instrumental approach to this decolonization of knowledge here. These are the problematic aspects that I can see.
Thank you. Martin.
Yes, just quickly. Yeah, I accept everything about neoliberal academia. Unfortunately, I don't think that Scholars at Risk can overthrow it in a couple of years. So what that means is that you also rightly said that some of these people end up being on the margins. So I think that the task is to try and bring them in as far as possible. And one thing that I think has helped in our case is providing people with mentors. I do that, we do that kind of routinely now within TS, but having someone who is an empathetic but critical friend. And so I think all we can do in the limited time that we have people with us is not overthrow neoliberalism, unfortunately, but help them to survive within it and give them advice on actually what, perhaps that's conforming to some of the norms, I'm not sure. But, this is a competition, so we have to make them competitive, I'm afraid, under the present circumstances. And I see my job is trying to give them kind of tough love, really. Say, look, this is the reality you're in. I think you need to do this. It ain't easy.
Thank you. I think our time is up, so I really want to thank you all who followed this panel, both online and in present here. And especially I want to thank you, the panelists, from for your important talks and viewpoints. And my sincere hope is that this discussion continues and that Scholars at Risk and similar work, it's not only Scholars at Risk that is doing this kind of work in our universities, will become more well-known and attract more people to carry the workload. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.